Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Backyard Pet Talk with Shannon Riley. I am here today with Michael Shikashio. I'm super excited to have you, Michael. It's been great following you. Michael's the founder and the CEO of aggressivedog.com and is one of our dog aggression experts. We're going to talk a little bit about dog aggression and who knows what else we will talk about, because anybody who listens knows that sometimes we talk about other topics that come up as we're going. How are you today, Michael?
Doing well, doing really well. Thanks for having me.
Good. I'm really happy to have you here today. One thing I always like to ask my guests first, because sometimes we have people who know you and are following you, and sometimes we have people who have an aggressive dog or they are just interested and they kind of want to know the background. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and, kind of how you got started in all of this dog
Sure.
training
Yeah.
stuff?
Yeah. I was not a dog trainer in my early career. I was a sushi chef. I worked at a casino for a little while. I was the head butler, taking care of high rollers and celebrities. So during that time, though, I was fostering a lot of dogs for various rescues, lab rescue, Dobermans. I didn't know anything about training at the time. I was just doing like this. And they send you the easy dogs, right? At first, like the ones
Right.
that most fosters aren't going to have a tough time because they want you to keep fostering. But
Exactly.
then as you get experience, they start sending you more difficult dogs as you go along. Things I started to recognize is that one of the most common reasons dogs are surrendered to rescues or shelters in the first place is for behavior. So I thought, what better way to help these dogs than to learn more about behavior and training? And then I started to fall into, they started to send me the dogs that had some growling history. Nothing really dangerous or anything, but just dogs with some history of aggression. I thought, well, I better really start to learn about what to do with these dogs the best I can, because that's the best way I can help them is to stay out of the shelters and rescues by working on the reason for their being given up on in the first place. That started my dog training journey, and I started taking part-time clients while I was working at the casino. I was working like 100 hours a week at a time between the two
Isn't
things,
it
but
insane what we could do when we were young?
oh yeah. And I used to work grave shifts sometimes, which actually was great because I could go to work at like midnight, could get a couple hours of sleep at work because people aren't usually they go to bed at like 3. So sleep from like 3 to 5, get up and make the coffee and get everything ready, and but then go take clients during the day. I was fortunate in my schedule, but finally was able to transition to taking dog training on full time, opened my business, and then I started just focus exclusively on aggression cases. Probably about 15 years ago, I founded aversivedog.com, and that turned into other trainers wanting to learn about
Mhm.
training and working with aggression. And that just one thing led to another. And then I've been very lucky over the last, decade or so to just travel and teach and just how to work with aggression using positive reinforcement.
Exactly. I know I learned about aggression in the 90s. I became a vet tech and then I was like, okay, now I can study my behavior that I had always been interested in. And I had an aggressive dog. It was my first adult dog, my own. I was newly married. She was aggressive and everybody was saying, shock and pinch. And obviously
Mhm.
things weren't working. And I saw Dr. Karen Overall. I did a seminar with her in the 90s and she said, aggression does not treat aggression.
Mhm.
That statement changed me for the rest of my life. And then learning about all these things, and we've learned a lot over those 25, 26 years or more, 30 years, how we can change it. And it's so important that people know that treating aggression with positive reinforcement is not only possible, but it's better. We need to be doing that. So I think what you do with aggressivedogs.com is great, spreading that awareness, because there's still so much misinformation out there about how to work with these dogs. What was your training? Kind of how did you get into it? Did you do seminars or did you work with
I
people?
at that time I'm getting kind of dating us both a little bit now. It's like when, back in the day it was mostly just books. There wasn't a ton
Right.
of stuff online. There weren't online courses like you see now. And you had some in-person stuff. I attended a local kind of dog training school in Connecticut. That was a lot of my initial training was from compulsion based or using aversive tools, which many
Mhm.
people did back, 25
Totally.
years ago. Learned a lot of the wrong things. I learned a lot of
Yes.
things, that I would not do now. But really, there wasn't a lot of information at the time. It really kind of felt, it depended on where you fell and what you discovered. It was easy to just fall into one side of dog training, and that's what you thought was out there. It's like, all right, this is what everybody's talking about. And you kind of don't get exposed to the other methods unless you're really looking for it or you join those communities. So you kind of get stuck in one side or the other. So I was really focused on the way Cesar Milan handles aggression and a lot of that kind of stuff early on. And, combination of TV, books, Yahoo groups,
Oh,
dating
yes. Yes. Yahoo
ourselves
groups.
here. When those are around, before MySpace and Facebook and everything, that was I learned a lot through those groups as well. But that's how I learned about other methods because there was folks in those Yahoo groups that were working with aggression that were using positive reinforcement at the time. Barbara Brill was one of them.
Mhm.
And she kind of mentored me and showing me there's other ways to do this.
Right.
And she
And
was very
you're
nice about it. And that's how I started transitioning to learning about other methods. Definitely run the full gamut of what people have tried in aggression cases from one end of the spectrum to the other. It's been a helpful part of my journey because at least I can understand where people are coming from when
Mhm.
they are using maybe other methods or approaches or something that I might not use nowadays. It's changed a lot in the last couple of
For
decades.
sure. I mean, I agree because my dogs were all first. There was no other method that I knew. And when I even trained my first lab that I trained when I was a teenager, I just went to the local dog school. Of course, it was requirement to have a choke chain. And then when she was a young lab and she got a little exuberant, they wanted me to put a pinch collar on her. And I tried someone else's. She yelped once. I said, no, thank you. I don't want to do that. So I always had like a little discomfort with it, but I didn't know any other way. And I actually started working in zoos when I was in college and learned about positive reinforcement. And I was like, wait a minute, if we can do this with tigers and orcas, birds, why are we not doing this with dogs? And it got my brain spinning, but you have to find that place. If I hadn't happened to go to a veterinary behavior conference, Karen
Yeah.
overall didn't happen to be there, and I didn't go to that class, who knows where I would be now. The methods have changed. And I agree with what you say is like, I don't, yeah, would I do that now? No, I haven't done any of those methods for at least 25 years now or, more, but I understand when somebody says, oh, well, we have to dominate the dog. We have to do this. At least I understand why they do it. So it helps me explain why that's not current, like that's old science or that's old ideas or old school methods. And I think that there's an important part of that sometimes.
Absolutely. It really is who we are exposed to. Like, because you're in the veterinary field, you have the
Mm-hmm.
opportunity. Like, and I wasn't, so I would have never heard of Dr. Overall at the time. I ended
Mm-hmm.
up learning about who she is and the work she does. But it's interesting, the paths we take in life. And that's not just in dog training, that's just in everything, in all of our
Exactly.
cultures. And that's one of the interesting aspects I've seen traveling around the world. That was just at last count about 200 different cities in the last about 6 years in 20 different countries I've been to for teaching workshops. And it's given me this really fortunate and unique perspective that I'm grateful for of seeing how much culture impacts the
Yes.
philosophies, the approaches to dogs, to humans, to interactions, to
Mm-hmm.
how we teach each other. It's fascinating because when we step outside and look at that, we can really start to understand, this is why people might ascribe to a certain method because they just simply haven't been exposed to that environment and that culture and that way of thinking. What I'm trying to do is really just keep pushing that information out there into the universe that, hey, this is the way that it can be done. I'm not
Exactly.
saying it's the only way, but if you're
Yeah.
interested in learning, here it is. Sort of the nice thing about social media and modern technology is the information travels very quickly versus the old days where we were reading books and it took us months to learn something that kids are learning in like 2 days on a few TikTok videos or something. Yeah, it's interesting just how much what we're exposed to influences us. I never blame anybody when they're doing something that I might not agree with, but they just haven't maybe learned the other side yet.
Exactly. It was for me, my early learning came from books and then going to veterinary conferences that happened to have behavior, which doesn't, especially back then. The
Mhm.
fact that Karen overall was speaking in the 90s about behavior and aggression is actually pretty phenomenal because the veterinary field is still, I mean, we have our behaviorists who are amazing, but this field itself is still way behind when it comes to behavior. And
Yeah.
it's hard to go to behavior conference. If you go to a general conference, very likely not going to be a behavior speaker. Then I was fortunate enough to get a scholarship to APDT, which I had never heard of early when I first started all this. And I got to go to my first APDT conference. So that helped me split veterinary behavior and dog training. And I was like, why are these things not together more? Because this was in the 90s and the early 2000s.
Mhm.
I'm like, why are we at odds? We should be working together. And now it's amazing because all these years I've been able to watch the fields start to
It's,
merge, which is
yeah.
really great. But the way that information has spread. And what you said about culture is really true. I mean, that even in the United States, sometimes there's beliefs about how dogs are treated, and
Mhm.
definitely when you go to different countries and how people are treated. And I think having empathy and compassion for all of those people helps us get the word out of how to do things better for our dogs and for our people. So I think what you're doing is great work.
I appreciate that. You have to think about from the dog's perspective too, because we've been talking about the trainer side and what
Mhm.
we do, but you think about how much the culture impacts their behavior. And since we're talking about aggression, that's another thing that I found very interesting is that in some countries, the way society is and culture is, you see sometimes a much higher prevalence of aggression or a
Mhm.
higher percentage, I would say, than in some other places. US being one where I see, of course, the work we do, what we get
Yes,
called for
exactly.
is you're going to see it's keeping us in business and big time
Right.
because there's so much of it. Whereas in some other countries like Switzerland, you hardly see any of it because of there's less restrictions on dogs. There's a different culture. There's different animal welfare standards. There's different treatment. There's so many variables that impact how the dogs are coming and showing up with aggression. Yeah, that's another fascinating thing. I think it's also helpful for folks that don't maybe travel a lot or don't see those countries and that relate to what I do instead of seeing like the landmarks and the things. And I go look for the
Exactly.
dogs. I'm looking for the
Exactly.
dogs and seeing what they're like. You get to see such profound differences, and that's a real eye opener for knowing, kind of learning about dog behavior and really why dogs display aggression in our society and in certain cultures much more prevalently. And so much has to do with not only the way they're treated by the humans in their lives,
Hmm.
but also the environment, right? And genetics, of course, and environment and all those other things, but definitely
Exactly.
cultural influences. Fascinating.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, just recently I heard of a study that they estimate 70% of dogs in the United States have some level of aggression. But then I went to Costa Rica with my daughter, and there's dogs everywhere, but there's nobody really owns the dogs. They just go from house to
Yes.
house and see who feeds them. So there's great part of that. But then you also have the dog who was hit by a car and had a broken pelvis and is still like healed with a broken pelvis because there's no owner to take care of them.
Yeah.
There's pros and cons to all of
Yeah.
that.
Your
But
veterinary
yes,
side must pull at you as well when you're traveling like that. Yeah.
exactly, because it's
Yeah.
like, oh my gosh, that dog's in
Yeah.
so much pain. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
really fascinating, which then pain adds to some of these behaviors. It's all intertwined if people just learn more about it. No, I
Yes.
think that it's great and truly seeing how we were a minority, of treating aggression within positive reinforcement 25 years ago. And I'm glad to see that it's swinging. But,
Mhm.
what are some of the things that you've seen the most change from when you first started to now?
Obviously, if we were talking about what kind of tools and methods are used, we've seen a significant change in that. The nice thing for me is that we've gone from sort of a behaviorism lens, which is important.
Mhm.
I'm not throwing any baby out with the bathwater here. So,
Totally.
but talking about operant conditioning, classical conditioning, and modifying behavior that way to looking much more so holistically at the dogs, not just, everything's an operant lens where we sit and positive reinforcement happens, that kind of thing. Important, but I find so much more of the nuance coming into the picture, as well as looking at aggression and helping dogs through different lenses. So, even just some of the more talked about things like emotional regulation or stress and resilience that everybody's talking about these days. Nobody would have talked about that even 5 years ago or 10 years
Right.
ago. So it's nice to see really kind of taking into account the dog's emotional well-being and welfare and quality of life versus the training paradigm is like sit down, stay calm. Heel is going to completely, or obedience is going to fix aggression.
Right.
It's shifted from that to thinking about emotions and classical conditioning to shifting even more to looking holistically at the dog, what kind of underlying pain is going on, and also looking at the relationships between the humans and their dog that might have just bitten them and layering that into the dynamic. So not just moving away from the cookie cutter
Right.
mentality and really thinking much more bigger picture. And I love seeing that. I love seeing the conversations around that because it's really
Mhm.
centering the dog's welfare and their needs, their emotional needs, their physical needs, all of those things that we've talked about for a while. But now I feel like a lot of the
It's
pieces are
coming
coming together
together.
and everybody's talking and looking at that. And that's, again, beauty of social media in this day and age of information. I'm just so impressed with like the kids, and they're like, you got these 20-year-old trainers and I see them posting stuff. I'm like, man, they're just so like their level of knowledge and their
Yeah.
depth and and understanding is it's impressive. You know, they sometimes can get in the weeds with the learning how to talk to each other, but I will say I'm always very impressed with some of the younger generation and their knowledge of training, like light years ahead of where I was when I started out.
I do. And I think, like trauma, like we're still just starting to understand trauma in humans, but I love that now we're looking at trauma, with dogs. My client, right before we got on, we were talking because their dog was in the shelter. And I said, one day in the shelter could be a very traumatic experience for a dog. And like that could alter, like, so you don't know what that dog was before they went into the shelter because that one day, I told them, I said, imagine you were in jail for one day. Like that could alter your life
Yeah.
forever. I mean, and this dog was in the shelter for 3 months, which is shorter than some dogs. But I think that understanding that whole ability, and the more, if we're talking at trainers, if this is something that you're interested in aggression, to get away from just that obedience part and like looking at the whole and educating yourself
Yeah.
on that whole dog, because there's still some trainers who I run into who still think that if they have a good sit and a down, that it's going to fix that emotional part. And it's two different
Yeah.
things.
Yeah, I think technology is also going to help us catch up on that aspect too, because are you familiar with the EMDR therapy?
Yes, I've actually experienced it myself, and I think it would be amazing for dogs to have. So,
Yeah. And so part of my travel is, again, I get to meet all these amazing trainers. So I know some folks out in European side of our world that are looking at using that with dogs,
mhm.
and they're studying that. So I think as we go along and we start using technology to our advantage in many different modalities and senses, like things like what I'm wearing now is this Whoop device. It measures, heart rate variability and how much you sleep and all those things. And they have very much similar products for dogs now. That Pace Collar is one of them that measures how much the dog's sleeping, how fast they're getting up. It can actually determine if a dog has arthritis based on their movement patterns and how fast they're moving one day versus others. It's just amazing. So imagine layering that into the behavior work we do. And as we know, that pain and underlying health issues and discomfort is a very common cause for aggressive responses in dogs, right?
Right, oh,
So
for
imagine
sure.
if we have some of the technology saying, hey, this dog might be experiencing X, Y, or Z because the heart rate was this way, and then you can do this much training the next day and things like that. It's just, yeah, I'm excited for the future of training too, because I think we're going to start seeing much more technology. And, obviously there's pros and cons in the whole AI debates, but
Right, exactly.
the thing is, the AI is never going to replace the dog trainer's job because human emotional, like there's a connection there. A robot could probably teach and do like a sit and get the timing way better than a human, but
Right.
who wants to do that anyways? Like person that gets a dog is going to be like, oh yeah, let my robot do it. Maybe you're still going to have that emotional and that human connection, that human animal bond, not robot animal bond. Maybe they'll have
Yes,
their own thing,
exactly.
but but
I
I
know it's
think
totally true when you're doing these one-on-ones.
yeah.
Like I'm looking at a whole, when I do a private session, it's like
Mhm.
I'm looking at the human, I'm looking at the dog, I'm looking at their relationship, and AI
Yeah,
just will never be able to
exactly.
analyze all those things
Yeah.
effectively. I totally agree. I mean, it can be a
We're
tool,
gonna
but it's not going to be perfect.
exactly. Well, an AI can spit out a very basic plan of like how to teach a dog to sit, and it'll do it pretty
Mhm.
well. But it is not going to see the nuances and not going to be able to read the body language and all those little communications. So,
Exactly. I
yeah.
think that that's super great. So as we were talking about, there are trainers who work with aggressive dogs and maybe, haven't educated themselves recently, or maybe there's some new trainers that are like, I want to learn more about aggression. And you have your workshops and you have your things. What would be some things that you would give an advice to if there's any trainers listening who are like, I really, because I get this sometimes, I want to work with aggressive dogs more. And it's not something that you can safely just jump into and decide one day, I'm going to work with an aggressive dog tomorrow. I have zero training, because it could be disastrous for everyone if you go in with too much of a ego without the education. But I hope that there's more that learn more about aggression too. So what's the first advice you would give someone who's like, I want to learn more? How do I advance my skills as a trainer?
I think the number one question somebody should ask themselves before they even consider working aggression cases is, do I love working with people? And if the
I
answer is
love that.
no, if the answer is no, or you got out of another career because you can't stand working with people or even talking to people, then don't work aggression cases. Because aggression cases, it's 90% the people, because the dogs, they become the easier part in the sense of, usually I quote there, but easier part because you see the same thing over and over and over after a
Totally.
while. You see a dog with resource guarding issues or something, and it's generally the same approach and it's
Mm-hmm.
generally pretty straightforward. Not a lot of, having to do lefts and right turns along the way. Yes, some cases can be complex or severe, but most of the time it's the people that you're going to be, that's the complex part. And knowing how to have conversations, especially when there's a lot of emotions involved, a lot of things like
Mhm.
guilt, frustration, fear,
Mhm.
embarrassment, all those things can happen in the human. And to be a really good, successful consultant, you have to be great at that side of it. Good communication, good empathy skills, all those things need to come as part of it. So that's the first thing. Like you got to love working with people. And if you do, great. Next thing is you have to know how to stay safe and keep everybody else safe
Mhm.
because safety and management plans, as we know, always comes in first with aggression cases. And so understanding how to do that, the different safety setups, the different equipment, the different defensive handling skills and things like that, probably next up on my list because you have to ensure everybody's safe. Ethically, you should, keep the safety of the dog, the people, other animals, yourself in mind, because one bite could spell the difference between a dog, surviving or not. So
Right.
safety is really important. And then getting good at reading body language, because that's part of safety, right? So we can see a
100%.
bite happening way before it happens, learning how to communicate, but really not only when the dog is, you're worried about biting, but also what that dog might be experiencing emotionally and how they're feeling. Are they feeling safe? And is their body language or behavior or physiological signs? Those are the three measurements I use. Am I able to see that to know, is this dog truly feeling safe? Are they feeling okay in this environment? Because if not, when you think about it, the reason for most dogs displaying aggression in the first place, because they
Yes,
don't feel safe. So they're just trying
exactly.
to get the threat to move away. So if we don't recognize that, we're just setting everybody up for failure, including the dog. So I would say those are probably my top three when it comes to before you start jumping into aggression cases, do those things. Because most of us as trainers, we can get behavior, right? We can teach
Right.
a sit, we can teach it down, we can mark and reinforce, we can
Right.
capture things. We can see a dog looking at a stranger and do like a look at that or engage, disengage,
Uh-huh.
pitfall. Like that's a skill, but it's not a hard skill to learn for most people.
Right.
So that comes with the territory. And if you're training already, you can get all that stuff. So I tell people, people think like aggression cases, there's some fancy training or protocol. For
Right.
me, the training, when I say training aspect, like getting behaviors or we're teaching certain skills, it's much easier actually in aggression cases than if I was to do like agility competitions or
Mhm.
some other dog sports or something that's trick training. Like that is much more nuanced in the mechanical skills than aggression
Yes.
cases.
Yes, it's true. Those are because I teach agility and I teach those things, and that's where my mechanical side comes in and the
Yeah.
timing and getting all that like what I want. But then, which is why I do both because I can't do all of one or the other, or I burn out. And then because it can be exhausting to see aggression cases because when you are being hyper aware of is the dog safe? Is the person safe? Are we in a safe environment? Am I safe? You're constantly assessing all of that while you're also trying to teach
Yeah.
the human how to do it themselves. And I get told often, you're not really a dog trainer, you're a human trainer. And I'm like, well, yeah, that's
Yeah.
also when especially in those situations. So I
Yes.
think that that's all really great valid things. And then you have to just actually, for me, love helping those dogs. And there are some people who say I will never touch an aggressive cage because I'm afraid to get bit, or I'm afraid, and it's
Yeah.
really because they're not passionate about that. For me, it's the fear and the anxiety and stress that I want to help the
Yeah.
dog. So that's where my passion lies. So I never burn out of those. They can be mentally exhausting sometimes.
Especially, I don't know how you felt when you started taking on more aggression cases. You're so used to like the dogs coming up to you, loving you, big fat lab jumping up on you, that kind of stuff, right? But then you go into aggression cases, you go weeks without even petting a dog. Like you can't even get
Yes.
close to the dog. And you can kind of take it personally if you're not really thinking through it. You're like, oh gosh, all the dogs hate me. Like 20 cases, and I couldn't even touch one of them this because they're all first consults. And I'm like, you have to remind yourself of that. It's like, and it
Yeah.
also helps you truly see the dog for who they are. You start to understand that these dogs are just displaying this behavior because they're
Yes.
scared, they're
Yes.
misunderstood. Once you see that, and then the reward, as you mentioned, comes from once you make that inroad and that dog is coming up to you after a couple sessions or something
Yes.
like that chunky lab that just wants to say hello. I love
Exactly.
that. That's one of the most favorite things, especially when I can see it in the client's eyes. They're like, like they see the progress, they see the hope, and the dog is also like, just it's great. I,
Exactly. I
yes,
have both. Sometimes I have clients who are like, why aren't you trying to pet my dog? I'm like, that's why all those people have gotten bit because they were trying to pet your dog.
exactly.
And
Yeah.
so then those people, I love that. So I get that. So
Yeah.
I oftentimes warn people ahead of time. I'm not going to touch your dog until they're comfortable and they're going to come up to me. And so they know. So they're not thinking I don't like their dog, number one. And then I also like it when I can wait. And then their dog comes up to me and they say, oh my God, you're the only other person my dog likes. And I'm like,
Yeah.
exactly.
Have you ever like gone to a dog training conference and or a workshop or anywhere really, and people know who you are and they come up to you and they're like, "Oh yeah, this is my dog." And sometimes they want like you to say hello to their dog, or maybe they want you to take a picture with their dog or whatever. And you can see the dog wants nothing to do with you. And I
Yes.
always feel like I have a tough time in those moments because I don't want to seem rude, but I'm not going to go up to a dog that doesn't want me to go up next to it. There's some dogs that will show up and they don't really particularly care for humans or maybe men or whatever. And I feel like I'm being rude,
Yes, I have to
like,
tell people, I don't think your dog really wants to. And then sometimes they don't even want to be at that conference at
yeah,
all. So, yeah. And then sometimes I'll be like, well, how about I stand by them? Or like,
yeah,
yeah, it's a hard
yeah,
thing. And you don't really necessarily in that moment want to do this whole long educational experience either, where you don't want to
exactly.
be like,
Yeah,
I'm going to take the next 30 minutes to explain this to you. You don't want to do that
mhm.
either. So,
Exactly. Yeah,
yeah, no,
yeah.
I know exactly what you're talking about. Well, speaking of owners and their aggressive dogs too, that they
Mhm,
might have some advice that you might say, okay, because we have all kinds
mhm.
of listeners to listen. So if we
Yeah.
had somebody who's a dog owner and or guardian, and they're say, I have an aggressive dog, what are some things that you give in a simple way? Because obviously we know this is way more detailed and it's very
Mhm.
unique. It's not as cookie cutter as obedience or other things. What would be some things you give advice to a guardian who's maybe experiencing aggression and they don't understand?
Yeah, I think the first thing is to understand that aggression is normal behavior for any animal. So when we feel threatened, humans are perfectly capable, as we know, of exhibiting aggression to defend themselves. So, and we see it all the time, but we never fault somebody that maybe punches the guy in the face that just tried to steal their wallet or something or their
Right.
money. So, same thing for dogs. The first thing I try to impart is like it's understanding their dog's not broken and they're really not doing anything abnormal. Sure, we'll see some odd behaviors, out there, but
Mhm.
most of the time it's very explanatory, self-explanatory when you look at it. And so understanding that, hey, your dog's just responding to a threat or a need it has to relieve that threat and feel safe because safety is the number one thing for
Right.
them. And if we do something to compromise that, they're going to respond aggressively. So that's number one. And then number two is to think about the situation in which that happens because aggression is contextual, meaning if we set the stage for that aggressive behavior, we're going to get it. If the dog feels trapped or threatened or unsafe and we keep doing that, they'll just keep doing what works for them. They're like, I put my teeth on somebody, that worked, and they got out of here. So I'll remember that again
Exactly.
in the future. I always recommend to clients before I even get to see them is to say, hey, think about what you're doing, what was happening, what were you doing before, what was the person or other dog doing before, what was in the environment, was it something of value, are they in pain, or is it something that's going on? And you may not know. It's not that's sometimes our job to assess what's going on for sure.
Totally.
But think about the context that it was just happening and try to avoid that in the meantime so the dog doesn't feel like they need to go to the aggressive response. Again, it could be a lot of different contexts. So sometimes you're not going
Hmm.
to be able to identify them all, but you can often figure out, okay, it's because I went and tried to pet my dog while he was on his dog bed.
Right.
And that's the only time he's done it. So just avoid that for now until we can do further assessments and I can determine what's going on. So that's number two, because that's going to reduce the dog's
Right.
likelihood of practicing the behavior and getting reinforced for doing that. It's going to help them feel safer. And then number three is, of course, seeking professional help. So if
Hmm.
you have aggression cases, that's generally the type of case you most of the time don't want to try to tackle on your own. So
Right.
getting a good professional in that understands how to work with aggression, especially from a positive reinforcement lens, is the next step. And in the interim, think about health too. So when in doubt, especially if the behavior is new, so you've
Hmm.
got a 4-year-old dog and suddenly over the last month they've been displaying aggression, that's almost an always do not pass go, do not collect 200, go right to the
Yeah.
vet because that's probably a medical issue. But it may not always be obvious because some dogs, they are going to mask their pain. They're not showing it very overtly, but we still want to rule that out. And ideally with a veterinarian that has some background in behavior, they don't have to be a vet behaviorist, but in one that can kind of know which tests or diagnostics to include for certain types of behavior. And that can be hard to find sometimes. So that can just sometimes be asking the trainer, hey, do you have any recommendations? questions or asking the vet, hey, do you have anybody on your team that has a background or interest in behavior? That's a good way of putting it. And getting the right tests done, because for all the dog guardians listening in, it's what can happen a lot is you go to your vet, they may not have a specialty in behavior or really have a lot of experience working with medical issues and aggression. And that's okay because we can't ask vets to specialize in everything. They already specialize in a lot when you think about it.
Exactly.
So don't get discouraged if, you find that there's nothing wrong, and also remember that your trainer or professional may tell you they need a second opinion here. That's very normal because it's just like going to your general doctor, your family physician that may not know how to look for, some type of cancer or Achilles tendon injury. They know how to diagnose like a specialist. So it's better to see the specialist that can help. So those are the things you can kind of preemptively do ahead of time, before you see the professional, but that's going to many times alleviate concerns, lower your stress, help you understand your dog more, and then in the meantime, get the professional help in to assist you.
As a veterinary technician, as an RVT, I don't work in practice now, but I work with tons of vets because I'm in collaboration with a lot of vets that are
Mhm.
local and in behaviorists that I'm friends with. It's something that what you said is also very important because the right test is important. Sometimes if a dog just goes in, and because I'm a keen eye to limping and I can see gait changes, it's just one of the ways my eye is trained. And I'll see a gait change and then I send them to a vet that doesn't know me or doesn't understand. And they'll be like, they palpate them. Well, they seem fine. Well, dogs will mask that pain.
Mhm.
I have to always encourage, they might say no, but ask for the x-ray anyway. X-rays aren't that expensive really in the grand scheme of things. It's the only way we're going to know if there's something. That just happened to me last night. I had a client who I referred back to the vet. The dog's leg does not sit normal at all, and he has aggression. We were improving it, but I'm like, if he's in pain, we're not going to get all this fully fixed. The vet kind of said, well, there might be some arthritis, but we don't care. I'm like, the dog sits abnormally every time it sits. So I just said, I had to give her a little bit of a boost of it's okay to advocate for your own dog and say, let's do the x-ray anyway. Even if you don't think, let's just double
Mhm.
check because if nothing else, it gives us a baseline. We rule that out. And then if there is something abnormal that your dog's been living with by masking this pain, we can also add any medications that are necessary for that. And then we can assist both things. So I think sometimes, and it doesn't mean obviously a veterinary advocate being in the field, but not all vets know about behavior and they don't understand the link between pain and aggression or fear or stress. Because if you hurt all the time, you are stressed all the time. When my back goes out,
Yeah.
I am stressed. Even when I'm sitting here smiling, internally, I have cortisol. I am stressed because I'm in pain. I'm just masking it so I can live life. And that's what, so that you are that advocate for your dog.
Yeah, and one other side tip on that note too is if it's your dog, you have concerns for the vet, get it on video. If we're talking about movement
Yes.
issues or things you see. So get it on video at home because a lot of dogs, they won't display it or they won't show that same because they're kind of like worried about the vets or they're not moving as much or they're
Mm-hmm.
not walking as they normally would or getting up out of a dog bed in during the day. And if you're seeing that, get it on film so you can then show the vet that because they may not show up in the office.
It's exactly what I advise my clients to. The same thing. I just told actually someone today that they said, well, we recorded him chasing the ball and he was hopping instead of running. And that's how the
Mm,
doctor went, I think your dog has hip dysplasia, which he did. Video is very important. And that's what veterinary behaviorists will also recommend to you and sports medicine doctors, veterinary sports medicine doctors, because you can't always see it
absolutely.
in the vet hospital on the slippery floors. They can't be off leash running. The videotape
Yeah.
is very important.
Yes.
Yeah. I
Yes.
don't ask them to reenact their aggressive behavior. I don't
Yes.
need to see
Yeah.
that. You can tell
Yes.
me
Thank you
about
for
that
saying
and
so.
I can fill in the blanks. Gait and orthopedic issues or pain. Yes. So, yes, as people say, well, don't you want to see it? No, no, we don't need to put your dog into that stress of wanting to bite you, but the orthopedic things so the veterinary can see it. I think that's great advice as well. That is a last tip you might want to share, like that you kind of share to a general audience. We might have people who are of all stages of animal life. What's an advice that you kind of give? Are there any general tips that you give to people?
In regards to regression or
Aggression, yeah, towards
yeah,
aggression. Yeah.
I think the number one thing is the understanding of the need for safety. I keep mentioning that but because a lot of other reasons get thrown at aggressive behavior, right? The dog's being spiteful, willful, dominant, challenging, stubborn, all these
Alpha.
different labels. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the vast majority of time, it's the dog dog's just feeling threatened. It's either they themselves are feeling threatened or they're worried about losing or having something they value threatened. So it could be food, toys, bones, resting spots, people, territory. One of the common things, they just want to protect what's theirs, just like we do as humans, or they want to protect themselves from threat or harm or injury. And when we think about it that way, we don't have to assign all these other labels of like, oh, this dog is, dominant,
Right.
dominantly aggressive. There's really such a small percentage of dogs that are displaying aggressive behavior in a positive balanced sense, meaning like they're having fun doing it. And it's typically, again, our humans have done over generations of breeding and selected for like guarding livestock or
Mhm.
guarding a person. And
Right.
that's a different type of aggression case. That's so far and few between. Most of the time, it's some underlying threat or need of safety. So always think safety first, meaning not
Right.
from dog bites, but from making sure the dog feels safe and secure in their world. And that is going to, just by doing that, you're going to solve so many problems, not only with the dog, but the relationship between the humans and the dog. So,
Yeah, no, I think that that's great information because people always have these stories of why
yeah.
their dog is aggressive. And then when we can boil it down to
Yeah.
they're just trying to keep themselves safe, like, especially, oh, they're being protective of me. Your little chihuahua that is biting everybody's ankles is protecting themselves, not you. They don't actually care that you're there or not sometimes. They're just scared of their own safety.
Yeah, and then the stuff that humans do in the name of misunderstandings and myths and wives' tales passed down, like if my dog eats steak, it's going to taste blood and it's always going to want to eat. Like that myth. I had a seminar. One of the myths was that somebody mentioned was like, if I pee on my dog's toys, this human saying this, if I pee on my dog's toys, then it knows I'm the alpha and I'm claiming all those resources, so it won't guard them from me.
Mine
Yeah,
was, I heard once, if I bite their ear, they'll know I'm alpha over them. And I was like, why would you bite your dog's ear? But that was like,
I'm sure the dog
okay.
was thinking the same thing too. Like, what? What's the point
Right.
of this? Is this
Exactly.
like some weird fetish or I don't know what's going on here.
Exactly. Some of the things I'm like, okay. So no, I think that they're just trying to keep themselves safe. Isn't that what we all are doing? I'm, as I admit it, I mean, I've done EMDR and I remember my therapist going through some really stressful things in my life. She's like, your brain's job is to keep the rest of your organism safe. Like that is literally what my amygdala's job is to do, is to keep my body safe. How you respond is just how your amygdala thinks it's keeping the rest of you, my
Yeah.
organism, she called it, but that was me, my body, safe. And she just dumbed it down to that. And I was like, oh, that's true. And that's what dogs are doing too.
Yeah.
That's your amygdala's job, the reptilian part of your brain. When we can make it, that's not, it's simple, but not easy, kind of situation. There's lots of nuances to it, but I think that's great advice. Well, thank you so much. I won't take all of your time because it's great to have you. I hope that all the listeners learned a lot about aggression and learned about that it's these background situations that they have. I hope that if you check out Michael's website, aggressivedog.com, we will have all the information here. When is your next aggression dog conference?
The actual big conference is going to be the Canis conference in
Okay.
Chicago, October 7th to 10th. That's a combination of the Aggression of Dogs conference. 6 other organizations were all coming together to have a massive conference. So it's the veterinary field, the sheltering field, rescue, science, dog sports, and nose work. And it's just so all of us
Wow.
coming together in one space to do what we were talking about at the beginning of the show is just collaborating more and sharing
Yes.
information. That's the major project for the year. I've got a lot of travel, a bunch of different
Little
countries
things,
again
but
this
that's the
year.
big one.
That's the
Awesome.
big one. Yep.
And some of Michael's things are online. So if you're unable to travel, you can check things out online too. Thank you again for being here. I hope that our listeners learned more about how to help their aggressive dog, or if they're a trainer, how to help aggressive dogs too. Thank you again for being here today.
Thanks so much for having me.